Hello everybody and welcome. This is the Shy Hat, that's me, and we are HackerFrogs. Alright, so everybody, today we're going to be doing HackerFrogs After School Python Programming Basics Part 5. It's been a long time coming, but we're going to be covering functions today, and functions are the meat and potatoes of any programming language. And after this, we're going to be able to do all sorts of great things with our programs. But before that, let's review what we've learned previously. All right, so last workshop, let's just reiterate here. This workshop is the 5th class for Intro to Python Programming. During our last workshop, we learned about a few programming concepts through Python, including the following things. So we learned about conditions. Conditions are used in programs to determine a program's course of action. They rely on the evaluation of Boolean statements, Boolean equations, to determine if certain instructions are performed or not. So, mostly, conditions are all about the if statement and evaluating some sort of equation to either true or false, and if it is true, then it will take a certain instruction, and if it is false, it'll take another instruction. So those are conditions. And we also talked about programming loops. Loops are tools that programmers use to run the same instructions multiple times. So there are two types of loops, of course. Loops can run a preset number of times before terminating or iterate through all of the items in a list or string in the case of for loops, or run continuously until a predetermined trigger state is achieved in the case of while loops. So programming loops come in two different forms, but today we're going to be learning about a new concept. New topics for this session include functions. So we're going to talk a lot about functions today, and functions are at the heart of Python. We've been using a lot of functions thus far, although we haven't been pointing out too much attention to them. So programming functions are defined instructions that can be used multiple times in the same code. For example, we see here that print is a built-in function in Python. So we use the print function to print out this statement right here. And the print function is probably one of the most commonly used functions, the built-in functions inside of Python. And of course, print, like any other function, requires the use of parentheses. If a specific set of instructions needs to be run multiple times in the same code, it is more efficient to create a function out of those instructions rather to input the same instructions again. So programmers might be tempted to copy and paste their programming instructions over and over again, but it is more efficient to turn those repeated instructions into something akin to a function, where it can be called over and over again, and it makes your code look nice and clean as well. So in fact, we've been using one of the most common Python functions this whole time, the print function. So the print function is a built-in function in Python, and we use it quite often in our programs. Any arguments that the function requires to execute properly, if any, are provided inside the parentheses while running the function. So using a function, executing a function, invoking a function, and calling a function are all the same words that are used for when a function is executed in the code. So usually you'll hear people talking about function calls, and this is what they mean when they mean to call a function. So let's talk about how to create functions. So we've got this handy-dandy example function right here, and we're going to be talking about we're going to break down what is involved in writing this function. So to create a function, we start with the word def for define, and then the name of the function over here, then a pair of parentheses. Okay, so the parentheses always come immediately after the name of the function, with any arguments required inside the parentheses. So here, there is one parameter inside of this function right here, and then it ends with a colon. So whenever we're defining a code block, we have to use a colon. So here the presence of a colon means that we're starting a code block, which means that all of the instructions inside of the code block need to be indented. So since a function is a code block, on the next line, we have to indent, typically 4 spaces, then input the function's instructions. If the instructions span multiple lines, each line must be indented. Any argument variables should be included in the instructions. Okay, so if you have a variable called, if you have an argument named, if you have a parameter name inside of your function, then you should reference it inside of the code block. Otherwise, why is it there? Right. So we see here that this is an example function right here. This function is called myGreeting, okay, with the name parameter, and it's simply going to print greetings and then the name over here. All right. So let's try creating this function in our online Python web page over here. So I'm going to provide the link for this web page. When you arrive on the web page, you're probably going to want to highlight all of the code that is already on the page and delete it. Okay, so we're going to create this function right here. So def myGreetings and then a pair of parentheses and then a colon, and then we hit enter, and then we're going to the great thing about this online Python website is that after we hit enter after the colon over here, it's going to automatically indent for us. So that's very convenient. So on the next line, we have to indent, and then we need to provide some instructions. So we're going to print, so myGreetings is going to take the name argument over here, and we're going to print a simple string. So hello, actually we're going to make this an F string. So hello, and then we can put some curly braces here, and then hello name inside the curly braces. And this is going to, when we execute this, it's going to print out hello and then the name that we provide. Okay, so this is just the definition of, we're just defining the function here. To actually execute it, we have to call the function. So to call a function, we just need to include the name of the function, and then inside of parentheses we provide the name that we want to have printed out. So hello HackerFrogs. All right. So when we run this, First, the function is going to be defined in lines 1 and 2, and then we're going to call the function on line 4 with the name HackerFrogs. So it should print out hello HackerFrogs. All right, so we run the function, and that's what it does. It says it runs the function, and we get the printout here, hello HackerFrogs. Nice. All right, so let's go back to the presentation. So here our example function is defined, then the function is called with the corresponding output shown thereafter. All right, so once again we have a very similar function being defined in the first couple lines here. So it's going to be greetings and then the name that is provided, okay? So what we have to, so the thing here is that the only difference between this and the program that we just created in the online Python web page is that in here we're using an F string to print out the name, and in this example here we're using C style string formatting. So next we're going to talk about the return statement. So return is an instruction that can be used in functions. So when used, return stores the value specified but doesn't print it out to the console. So we see here we've got another function that has been defined over here, and this function over here is going to calculate sales tax. It's very exciting. So I'm sure you all find it very exciting that there's a function that calculates sales tax. All right, so we see here, this is being defined here, sales tax calc, and the argument that is input here is the amount of money, and that's going to, what this function is going to do is first it's going to define a variable called sales tax, which is going to be something that is multiplied. So 15% is going to be 1.15, and then we're going to return the amount that we run the function with, and then we're going to multiply it by the sales tax, which is 1.15, and then we're going to get the total after the tax has been applied. So the return portion of the function is useful for passing values to other parts of the program, but it's not going to output to the console unless we use the print function with it. All right, so if we were to run the function by itself, it's not necessarily going to print to the console, because we have to explicitly print with the function in order to have it print something out to the console. So using return doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to print, but it does mean that it is something that we can save to other parts of the program. All right, so next we're going to talk about setting variables inside of functions. So what are we talking about? So we're talking about how functions and variables outside of functions interact. So by default, if a function uses a variable which exists outside of the function, any modification to the value of that variable will revert after the function finishes execution. So for example, if we have the variable name over here set to some name such as John, and then we're going to define a function which sets name as another name, then we see that the change to the name variable over here only applies while the function is running. So if we were to then call the function nameSet, which changes the name variable, and we set it to Betty, and then when we call the function, it's going to print out the name variable as Betty. But if we were to print out the name variable after this has been executed, then it's going to print out John. So to illustrate this, I'm going to copy this code, and then I'm going to go over to the online Python page over here. All right, so if we run this, let's just go over what the new name function does. So the new name is going to take one argument over here, which is a name, and then inside of the function here it says name is going to be equal to new name. So whatever new name you set over here, it's going to set the name variable to that, and then it's going to print out that name. So nameSet Betty is going to change the name variable from John to Betty, and then it's going to print it out. And then if we were to print out the name variable afterwards, we can see that the name variable has reverted back to its original value, which is John. So let's run this. And as expected, when we call this function over here, it prints out the name, which has been changed to Betty. And then after the function is finished running, then the name variable reverts back to John. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. All right, so in fact, any variables created inside of functions are not accessible by the rest of the code. If we were to run the above code, it results in an error, name pynum is not defined. So let's take a look at this code over here. So here we've inside of this function definition, we've defined the pynumber function, and all this function does, it's going to have a number which is equal to pynum, and it's going to be equal to 3.14, which is the first digits of pi. and then it's going to return. But the thing is, we can run pynum. We can call this function over here, and within the function, the pynum variable exists. But as soon as the function is finished executing, this variable over here, pynum, doesn't exist, isn't available for the code to access anymore. So if we were to print this variable inside of the pynum function, it's not going to be able to access it. So just to illustrate this, we're going to paste this in, and then we're going to run this. And it says, of course, that the name pynum is not defined. This is an error on line number 5. And line number 5, we're trying to print out the pynum variable. So the pynum variable is here. The problem is, because the pynum variable is inside of a function definition, the rest of the program can't access it. All right, so this is something we have to remember. Variables interact differently inside of functions, and functions and variables that are outside of the function will be reverted, even if they're adjusted or modified by a function, are going to revert back to their original values after the function is done executing. Okay. All right, so next we're going to talk about functions with parameters. Of course, we have already been including parameters in our function definitions, but let's just address this topic directly. So functions can be written with parameters, which are used inside of the function's code block. Okay, so here we have a function. We're defining a function called add2numbers. So add2numbers has 2 arguments, so it has 2 parameters, a and b, and all the function does is that it adds these two values together, a and b. So of course these have to be done with either integers or floats. And so we've also defined x. X is a variable which equals calling add2numbers with the numbers 1 and 2, and then we're going to print this x variable over here, and it's going to return the numbers added together. So 1 and 2 added together is 3. At least I think it is. Basic math can be very difficult sometimes. That was a joke. All right, so we go back to the Online Python page over here, and actually we see this done quite often. We see it done quite often where function calls aren't directly done. They're saved as a variable, and then the variable is something is done with the variable afterwards. This is part of compartmentalizing the instructions so that they're easier to comprehend. All right, so if we're to print x, which is equal to the function called add2numbers 1 and 2, it's going to return 3. So we run this again, and it returns 3 as expected. All right, so whenever we include the names of parameters inside of our function definitions, we have to make sure to include them inside of our instructions. Otherwise, what was the point? Okay, so A and B. So A and B are these 2 things that are passed by the program to the function. All right. Next, we're going to talk about functions with default parameters. So functions can also be written with default parameters, which are substituted in if the function is called without specifying that parameter. All right, so let's pretend we have, let's not pretend. Let's see here that we have a function called greetUser. So greetUser, and it's going to have 2 different parameters here. There's going to be a first name and a last name. But in this case, we're specifying what the arguments are by default. So there are two. So there are two things. There are parameters, which are the different things that need to be plugged into, functions, and then there are arguments, which are the things that are actually plugged into the functions and when they are executed. So here we see that by default, the first name parameter is going to take the argument John, and the last name parameter is going to take the argument Doe. So if you were to run greet user by default without specifying the first name and the last name, then the first name's default is going to be John and the last name's default is going to be Doe. And all this function does is that it prints out hello first name last name. So we can also let's play around with this a little bit inside of the online Python webpage. So we paste these instructions over here. So this print needs another. So typically, let's space this out a little bit so that the instructions are easier to understand. So greet user, whenever we call greet user, if we don't supply any arguments, then it's going to be John Doe, which is the first name and last name over here. But if we were to supply a first name or a last name inside of the function call, then it's going to use whatever argument we pass to it as the last name or the first name, respectively. So inside this code, on line 4, we're going to call greet user with last name Smith. So last name Smith is going to replace last name Doe, but the first name is going to remain John. So greet user with this argument right here is going to be John Smith. But afterwards, we can run this function call without specifying the first name argument or the last name argument, and it's going to, the parameter, and it's going to output hello.doe. So when we run this, the first one is going to be John Smith, and the second one is going to be John Doe. So we can also run this while changing both of these parameters. So let's just delete this, and we can do greet user with first name equals and last name equals, and we can do David Suzuki, the famous Canadian naturalist. Okay, and when we run this, it's going to print out hello David Suzuki instead of John Doe, which are the defaults, because the defaults have been overwritten by providing arguments over here. All right, so next, we're going to do our programming functions exercise. All right, so we're going to go through this slowly because we want to better understand how these functions work. So what we need to do is we need to go over to learnpython.org over at this endpoint over here for functions. I'm going to copy this URL for everybody in chat. Okay, and let's go back up to the top. So here we're talking about functions. Functions are a convenient way to divide your code into useful blocks, allowing us to order our code, make it more readable, reuse it, and save some time. All right, so also functions are a key way to define interfaces so programmers can share their code. All these things are great. How do you write functions in Python? So we have seen on previous tutorials, Python makes use of blocks. A block is an area of code written in the format of block head, first block line, second block line, etc. So this is just illustrating how code blocks work in Python. So we can replace blockhead with making a function. So if we were to define greetings again, we remember that after the colon here, that's going to start the code block. So the first line has to be indented. Print hello, and print how is it going. Okay, so because these are all part of the same code block, they need to be indented to the same degree. So if it's going to, so the first code block is going to be indented one tab in. It's whatever you choose to do for your code block. If it's going to be one tab or two spaces, you have to stay consistent. So if we're to, so after, of course, we need to call our function. And when we call our function, we need to include our parentheses, even if we are not including any arguments with our function call. So run this, and then it runs whatever is inside of the greetings function definition over here. All right. So let's move on to the next one, where a block line is more Python code, and even another block, and the block head of the following format: block name, argument 1, argument 2. Block keywords, you already know, are if, for, and while. So this is referencing loops. So if there are, so while you're using things like if statements and for loops and while loops, you have to write those as a code block. Functions in Python are defined using the block keyword def, followed with the function's name as the block's name. For example, def my function. All right, so here we see an example of a function being defined. So they're defining my function, and all it's going to do is print hello from my function. Of course, because it's a code block, we need to indent over here, and this isn't going to run by itself. This is only defining the function over here. So we run this, and when we run this, nothing happens. So we need to call the function in order to have it execute the instructions. So on line 4, this is the only instruction that's going to print to the console. When we run this, it says hello from my function. Okay. So functions may also receive arguments, which are variables passed from the caller to the function. For example, all right, so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about parameters. So here we've defined another function, my function with args. So args means arguments, and this takes two. So there's two arguments that need to be provided: the username and the greeting. And on the second line, let's see. So in this function, it's going to print hello string from my function. I wish you string. And this is using C-style string formatting, of course. So it's going to take a tuple, which contains the username and the greeting, and these are defined in the arguments over here. So username and greeting over here. All right. So if we wanted to run this, we want to call this function, my function with greetings. Okay, we need to provide a username and a greeting. So I'm going to say the first thing is going to be, so the first thing that we input here is going to correspond with the first argument, username, and the second one is going to correspond with greeting. So I'm going to say HackerFrogs. So hello HackerFrogs, I wish you something. I wish you a good day. All right, so this should print out this statement right here. Hello HackerFrogs from my function, I wish you a good day. So let's try it out. So when we run this is what happens. Greetings, hello HackerFrogs from my function, I wish you a good day. There's a lot of strange commas in here, but it's not exactly grammatically correct, but let's just roll with it. Okay, so the next section over here, it says that functions may return a value to the caller using the keyword return, for example. And here we're going to add two numbers with this function right here. Sum two numbers a, b. So the two arguments are a and b, and it's going to return a plus b. So this is just a function which adds up two numbers. So we can, when we call the function sum two numbers, we have to provide two numbers in the form of a and b. So if we just input two numbers, then the arguments are going to assume that the first number is a and the second number is b. So when we run this, nothing happens. So it says out over here 3, but in reality nothing is going to be printed at the console. So we need to make this explicit. So we're going to create a variable x out of this, and then we're going to print x. So that's going to, this is the correct way to get the output of a function to print it at the console. Sum two numbers. We can also say, we can do b equals 2. And in fact, it doesn't really matter, but we can do b equals, we can input b first and then a afterwards, and it should result in the same thing. Right, so we can also make it explicit what we want the names of the arguments to equate to over here, like this. Okay, next. So how do you call functions in Python? Well, we've been talking about that a lot already, but let's just go over this again. So we're going to simply write the function's name followed by the parentheses, placing any required arguments within the brackets. So for example, let's call the functions written above in the previous example. So we've got all of these functions over here. We've got my function, which simply prints hello from my function. On line 5, we have my function with arguments, username greeting, and which prints out this string right here with the username and the greeting included inside of the string. And then we have sum two numbers, which is adding these two numbers together. On line 12, we call my function, which is going to print out hello from my function. And then we're going to use my function with args. We're going to call this with John Doe and a great year, which is going to print out. So these both print out because print is part of the function. But normally, when you run a function, whatever the function does is not going to be printed out unless it's explicitly stated inside of the function that we're going to print. And the last thing is going to be x equals sum two numbers 1, 2. And the thing here is that this is not going to print normally unless we explicitly say print, because inside of the function definition here, it only says to return a and b, which means it saves the value, but it's not going to print it out to the console. So let's run this. So we can see that the two functions that have print inside of them, they printed out something. But the third one, which doesn't have a print instruction, did not print out. All right, let's move on. So here we're talking about this exercise. So in this exercise, you'll use an existing function while adding your own to create a fully functional program. All right, so we're going to add a function named list benefits, that returns the following list of strings: more organized code, more readable code, easier code reuse, allowing programmers to share and connect code together. All right, so we need to add this function, which returns these strings. And then number 2, we need to add a function named build sentence with the info over here as the parameter, which receives a single argument containing a string and returns a string starting with the given string and ending with the string is the benefit of functions. Okay, so it's going to take a string and create a sentence, starting with whatever string is given and then ending with is the benefit of functions. Okay, so number 3, run and see all the functions work together. Okay, so over here, we need to modify this function to return a list of strings as defined above. So we're creating the function here, list benefits, and it wants us to return something inside of a list. Okay, so remember that the instructions say to include these strings. So all we need to do, because we need to include these strings, is to copy this. Copy and paste. So this is the bread and butter of programmers, copy and paste. So we're going to return this list right here. We just need to paste this in, and we've created a list full of these strings over here. So it's got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. It has 4 strings inside of here. Okay. And on line number 5, we have to modify this function to concatenate to each benefit is a benefit of functions. So we need to create this this function right here, which is build sentence with the benefit, and we need to return something. So what we need to do is we need to return let's see, how would we do this? Okay. So seeing as they really like to use C format strings, we can do string is a benefit of functions. And then outside of the string, we need to specify what it is, and it's going to be the benefit. Okay, so the benefit, list of benefits, what we need to do is we need to, here, list of benefits equals benefits for benefit. In list of benefits, we're going to print this thing. Okay, so let's try running this code. Okay, so when we run the code, let's take a look at what's going on here. All right, so first we define the list benefits, which is a list filled with these strings right here, and then the build sentence function over here is going to return the benefit, and the benefit is a certain string. Certain string is a benefit of functions, and it prints out that string. And then what's happening on line number 9? Let's take a look. So on line number 9, there's this other function over here, which is called name the benefits of functions. And inside of this code block, it's list of benefits equals list benefits. So list of benefits, the variable, is equal to list benefits, the function call. So list benefits is up here. List benefits is going to return these different strings. And then we're going to run a for loop. So for benefit in list of benefits is going to print build a sentence with the benefit. So it's going to loop over and over again, and it's going to create this output right here. So more organized code is a benefit of functions, more readable code is a benefit of functions, easier code reuse is a benefit of functions, and allowing programmers to share and connect code together is a benefit of functions. So that was the exercise for this particular section. So if you have any other questions about how functions are used or how we create them and how they interact with different pieces of code, please type in the chat and let us know. Otherwise, we're going to move on to our quiz for this section. So, all right, let's move on to the quiz. So, functions quiz, 1 of 3. So we're going to have 3 questions in this quiz. So what is going to print to the console? So we're defining our function over here, add number, AB, and it's going to return a plus B. And then we do a function call, add number, 2 and 3. So the instruction is that we're going to execute the function over here, add number 2 and 3, but what is going to print to the console? So print to the console is the important part of this question right here. Is it going to be A, is it going to be B, or is it going to be C? Is it going to be... Thank you for following 8BitBoy VT100. Welcome to the club. All right, so is it going to be the number 5, or is it going to be, there's a syntax error in the code, or is it going to be nothing will be printed to the console? All right, so the answer is Beta Bethel. Welcome to thank you for being here. 8BitBoy VT100. The number 5. Okay, so you both say that this is going to be the number 5. So the important part here is print to the console. So there's no explicit print. There's no explicit print instruction inside of this function. So nothing is going to be printed to the console because there was no instruction to print. So that's the problem. So return, you might think that because it says return A and B, that it's going to print something out, but it's not going to print unless you explicitly ask it to print. So this is just something we have to get used to when we're programming inside of Python. All right, so what is going to print to the console? So we've got my number, which is equal to 7. And then we have our definition. So we're defining the number set function, which takes a number as an argument, and then it changes the my number variable to whatever number is specified right here. Then the my number function is run with the number 14, and then it's going to print my number. So what's going to print? Is it going to be the number 7, or is it going to be the number 14? We talked a little bit about this earlier. There's an interesting interaction between variables outside of functions and variables inside of functions. So 8-bit boy says it's going to be A, and Benita Bethel says it's going to be B. So the answer is that it's going to be the number 7. So this has been defined outside of a function. Even if we modify something inside of a function, whenever the function finishes running, then whatever variables that are modified inside of the function are going to revert back to their original values. So even if we adjust a variable inside of a function, it's not going to affect the function outside of it. So that's what we have to understand there. All right, so the next question is, so 8-bit boy says the number is changed locally and is not returned. So that is correct. So functions it kind of exist in their own space. And when they're modifying stuff that's outside of the function, those functions are not permanent. You can have functions that affect code that is outside of the function, but you have to use a special keyword in order to do that. All right. So the last question is, in Python, what does it mean to call a function? Choose 2 of the following 4 options. So there are 4 options here. 2 of them are the correct definition for what it means to call a function. So A is to define a function and its parameters. B, to execute the code with a function. C, to communicate with the function by phone. Or D, to invoke a function by using its name followed by parentheses. We're going to choose two of the following four options. So there are two answers here that fit. So Poor Eye say it's C. 8-Bit Boy says it's A and D. Poor Eye says it's a trick question. Only C is the right answer. Okay, so the correct answer is B and D. So calling a function is both B, to execute the code within a function, and it's also D, to invoke a function by using its name followed by parentheses. So the trick here is that there's a lot of, so using a function in the code, we use a lot of different words that mean the same thing. So whenever you hear somebody say to call a function or to invoke a function or to run a function or to execute a function, these are all different words that mean exactly the same thing. All right, so lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to write a program which features many of the concepts we learned in this workshop. So we're going to use the onlinepython.com website to write the program. So we're going to write the program together. So anybody in chat is welcome to voice their opinion on what we should do to write the program. And what we're going to do is we're going to write a program that has two lists. So one is going to be 4 colors, and another one is going to have 5 fruits. So I'm going to paste this into chat so that you can start writing this on your own. So just in case you don't have the link for the website that we're using, onlinepython.com, to write our Python code, go ahead and use that website. Whenever you load up the website, there's going to be some existing code on the page already. All you need to do is you need to highlight it and then delete that, and then you can start writing your own code. All right, so back over here, this program is going to have 2 lists, one with 4 colors and another one with 5 fruits. So we're going to have a function which loops through a list and prints out each item. So the function should be called twice, once for each list. So how are we going to write a function which loops through a list and prints out each item? Do you remember how to write a loop? Okay, so let's go over to our our python.com page, and I'm going to create our colors list. Colors is a list, and fruits is another list. So we need to populate our list over here. I'm going to copy from the chat. And we're going to make sure that these are strings by putting them between quotes. Remember, if it's not between a pair of quotes, then it is not a string, it is a variable name. And we're going to grab our fruits. Did I paste the same? I pasted the colors twice into the chat. Let me grab the correct thing. Okay, so this other one is going to be the fruits. Okay, so now that we have our 2 lists, how do we need to create a function. Okay, so we're going to do define, and we're going to call this function list out. List out, and it's going to take a list as an argument. All right, so everybody, does anybody remember how to do so if we wanted to print out, each item in this list, how do we do that in a for loop? Does anybody remember? So this is going to be for. So 8-bit boy says for item in list print item. Okay, that sounds like a good start. So for I, for index or item in, and it's going to be list. And remember, because when we write a for loop, that is another code block, so we need to make sure that this is indented as well. So because this is a code block inside of a code block, we need to make sure that that this is double indented. So we need to print I. So this is the function over here. So we're going to list out list, and this function is going to, for the item in the list, we're going to print out that item. Okay, so this is all we need. This is all we need for this particular function, but we need to call the function. So how do we call out the list out function with the colors list and then the fruits list? So remember that to call a function, we need to use the name of the function along with the pair parentheses, and then we need to inside the parentheses we need to name the argument. So we can list out with colors. So that's going to invoke the list out function with the colors list, and then we can list out with fruits, and that's going to list out the fruits list. So list out is going to print out each item in a list, and that's all it does. So we can do list out for the colors and then list out for the fruits. Okay, so let's try running this, and it's going to return all of the items in both of these lists. First the colors, and then the fruits. All right. So if anybody has any questions about any of the function concepts that we covered in today's lesson, please type in the chat to let me know. Or if you have any other questions, please type that in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to go into the summary of today's workshop. Before we go into the summary, I'd like to say that both Black Girls Hack and Women's Society for Cyberjutsu. So Benita Bethel says, sorry, what does for I in list mean? Okay, so we're talking about line 4 here for I in list. So we're talking about the for loop, and whenever we have a for loop, we usually have to iterate through some sort of container object. And in this case, the container object is the list, and I is a local variable. It's basically a variable we use only inside of the for loop, and it usually means the component. So for the component of the list, it's going to print that component. And in this case, because we're talking about a list, it's going to be each individual item. So for I in list, for each item in the list, it's going to print out that item. So it's going to go to colors, and then it's going to print out each item in the colors list. So for I in list, we can also change I to something else. It doesn't have to be I. So we can call this item for item in list, print item. It's just the name of a variable that is only used inside of this for loop. Okay, so for everybody, I'm going to pass out the feedback survey. So if you're part of BGH, please use this survey, and if you're part of Women's Society for Cyberjitsu, please use this link right here. All right, so let's get into today's summary. Let's review the programming concepts we learned in this workshop. All right, so we've got functions. So functions are defined blocks of code that can be executed multiple times in the same program. So functions are essentially little programs inside of a program. 8-Bit Boy asks, you guys were at DEF CON, right? DEF CON, are you talking about the local DEF CON? My local DEF CON is DC 604, which is in Vancouver. Are you talking about the Vancouver DEF CON, or are you talking about the Las Vegas big DEF CON? DEF CON 31. DEF CON 31? Is that the one in Las Vegas? Oh, no. I've never been to the big DEF CON. I've only been to my local DEF CON, but I'm hoping to get out to the big DEF CON one of these days. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but one of these years I'll be out there after I become a big enough hacker. But thank you very much to everybody who came and attended this workshop on Python. Executing a function is usually referred to as calling a function or a function call. You can also, whenever we run a function, you can call it running a function, executing a function, calling a function, invoking a function. There are all sorts of words. But in the next HackerFrogs After School Programming Workshop, we're not going to conclude, but in the next class, in the next workshop, we're going to talk about classes and objects. But essentially, we've covered everything we need to do to cover in order to write interesting programs using Python. We talked about functions, we talked about loops, and we talked about variables. So these are the things we need to know about Python in order to write cool programs. All right, so before we finish off today's session, I'd like to say that that HackerFrogs has a YouTube channel. It can be located right here over at youtube.com/theshyhat. I'll leave that link in the chat. And we've got all sorts of things over here. We've got our shorts featuring my lovely backyard birds. These are stellar jays, which are easily one of the coolest birds in the entire world. Let me Google some pictures of stellar jays. And if you look up stellar jay fledgling, we see these baby birds over here, and they are easily some of the cutest baby birds you'd ever seen. Just look at that. All right, but we're not here just to talk about birds. We also have a bunch of videos here talking about different CTF challenges. We've got Pico CTF. We've got maybe 40 different Pico CTF challenges over on the videos section, and we're uploading a few times a week. And we also have all of our previous live streams over here. So if you have missed any of the previous HackerFrogs After School workshops on Python, we've done 5 of them after all. You can catch them over here. Every Friday, we're also doing some Hack the Box. We've been doing a series on Hack the Box, except for last Friday, where we had to switch over to Try Hack Me because the Hack the Box website was acting really weird. But if you take a look at the schedule for this week, on Friday for this week, we're going to be going back to Hack the Box to run through the archetype box over there. And this is a series of walkthroughs for Hack the Box and how to start with that, start learning on that platform. It's going to be later than what we usually run. So this is going to be at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're on the East Coast, I understand that this might be too late for you to watch. on Friday, and that's going to be on June 21st. But if you can watch the video afterwards, that would be cool too. But that's what we got going on for this week. I'd like to shout out Black Girls Hack and Women's Society of Cyberjitsu for providing students for this workshop. Thank you very much to them. Without them, we wouldn't have any students and we would be very sad. But until next time, until Friday, when we have our HackerFrogs free hacking, and you can take a look at the schedule for this week's stream over at this link right here on our HackerFrogs Reddit. If you haven't joined the Reddit yet, please do, because we post a bunch of different links. We mostly have collections of links which point to free education resources for a bunch of different topics, like Linux education resources or computer general skills resources over here. But thank you very much for attending today's workshop, and we will see you next time.